Welcome back, everyone. We hope you took a lot of notes and made a lot of mental ideas you have for doing some of the things that you learned in part one in your families. So to solidify these ideas, what we want to do in this part is to completely deconstruct one behavior change. So you get an idea of how the four laws kind of come into picture. So James, ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So, I should mention that if some of you have jumped into this segment directly to see what it looks like, a lot of it might not make sense. So please watch the first part before you kind of go into this part. Okay, so let's look at one habit that a lot of us parents deal with. So, and this is to get good homework habits established for our kids. Shall we go through the four laws in the context of this example?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
All right. So the big picture here is to try and get our kids into the homework habit. So the first law that we looked at was make it obvious. So how do we apply that in this context?
So I think there are two questions to ask here. So the first question is, how can we make it more obvious to get in the habit of doing your homework or studying or pulling your books out and so on? And there are plenty of things we can talk about there. But the second question might be the more interesting one to start with, which is, how can we make it less obvious to fall into the distractions that prevent homework from often happening, right? So if you walk into your living room or your kitchen or your kid's bedroom, and there are a bunch of distracting cues that are very obvious, like the video game controller and console is out on the floor, and the television is like on when they walk into the room, or their phone is always out and visible on their bed, or their computer is the first thing that they see when they open the door and look into their room and see the desk. Like all of those things increase the availability and the number of times that they will be reminded of distracting things that could take them off track, right? So perhaps the first thing to do is maybe cleaning up a little bit of those distracting cues and asking like what things there might pull them off course. So, there are basic things you can do here, like storing the video game controller and the console, like, in a drawer or a shelf or something, rather than leaving it out in the middle of the floor, or putting the TV inside a wall unit or a cabinet so that it's, a little more hidden rather than obvious and available and on as soon as they walk in the room. But then there's also questions about like the digital environment. So many kids now, this is different than when I was in school, like pretty much everybody has a phone, right? So, what are they seeing on their phone? Which cues and icons are most obvious and visible and so on. And if they do, for example, their homework on a desktop computer, then what is on the desktop? Is it the most distracting different applications or games or pieces of software, or are they seeing like the Word document as soon as they open up the environment? So priming the environment for some of those things can be helpful. A second thing that is maybe in between these two. So right now we just started by talking about distractions, and then we could talk about how to make the good cues more obvious. Something that sort of bridges the two is potentially having a more clear delineation of what devices are used for which things. So I have a friend who's a writer. He does only writing he does on his computer desktop. Only reading and browsing media, watching YouTube, he does on his tablet. And so by having those things more clearly defined, you could even, if your kids do their homework on the desktop computer, for example, you could remove the web browser from that or something, or you could remove all software and games from that, uninstall the applications that distract them. You could block all social media sites on that computer, things like that make it very clear, okay, when you're on the desktop, this isn't the fun device, right? This is just for getting work done. But then when they're on their phone or they're on their tablet or whatever, then they can actually do some of the other stuff. So those are some ways of making the good actions more obvious and the bad actions less visible. Another question to ask is, what needs to be obvious and available for them to perform the action of doing their homework? And one thing you can do here is priming the environment. Like if they're a young kid and they need markers and Sharpies and whatever, like having that out and ready and on the table as soon as they get home from school is one way to prime the environment to make it easy to get into the action of doing the homework. But the more that you can do things like that, the more likely it is that they'll slide into that habit to begin with.
So when you were talking about distraction, it reminded me of some of the parents in our community who mentioned that they have this habit of checking in and checking out devices. So it's like at 5 p.m. or whatever time or however works for your family, you have this habit where everybody checks in all their electronics in one bowl. So everybody puts their phones, everybody puts their iPads and everything, the remote control for the TV, everything goes in that one bowl, and it can't be checked back out until 7 when everybody's done with their work. So I think that's a great thing for distraction.
Yeah, and there's an additional layer that you could add to that if you want. So you can find them on Amazon or some other retail websites, but they make these Tupperware containers that have a timer on them. And so you can set how long the Tupperware will be locked. And so if you wanted, you could have everybody check in, put all their devices inside, lock it for an hour, set the timer for an hour or however long you want it to be. And you literally can't get to it for an hour or so. Now, the extremity there and like how much you want to use that or not, it's going to be, depend on what your goals are and how reasonable you think that is. But that also, by the way, can work for adults, right? So if you are in the habit of checking social media or email before you get out of bed, well, what you could do is you could charge your phone inside that Tupperware container and have it locked all night. And then when you wake up in the morning, you just get like a regular alarm clock. You use that to turn off. You start your morning routine, you get through the morning day, and then the Tupperware unlocks at 7 a.m. or whatever, and you can actually get it out and look at it. So it's not the first thing that you grab. But anyway, yeah, there are a variety of strategies that you can use.
That is great. I didn't even know such a thing existed. It's amazing how creative people are, right? And in terms of making the cues more obvious, we could use habit stacking here, right? So for instance, come from home and then the next habit might be have a snack, have some unwind time, but immediately after that, it's homework time. So
I think that's great. Having a clear plan like that is a really effective one, right? After I walk in the door, I will hang up my backpack and my coat. After I hang up my backpack and my coat, I will have a snack. After I finish my snack, I will start the first piece of homework or whatever it is, right? You have some very clear stack for how you get into how homework is initiated. Because a lot of the time it's like once you're started on it, once you're 5 minutes in, well, then you just kind of keep going. It's like getting everybody to sit down and actually do the first problem is the biggest part.
Right. Okay, so the next law that we looked at is make it attractive. And this one is addressing the craving, the motivation, all that. So talk to us about how that works in this.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of a different answer here than maybe what you're thinking. So that, we talked about things like temptation bundling or ways to increase the attractiveness of the behavior by pairing it with something. But I think ultimately what you're looking for here as a parent is you want a student that takes pride in being a good student, right? You want somebody who takes pride in doing their homework or doing a good job or finishing what they start. And so it is attractive to do those behaviors if you take pride in them, if you view that yourself as the kind of person that does that. And so there is perhaps a more effective long-term strategy that parents have at their disposal, which is, any parent can tell you this, right? When when a kid is young, all humans are masters of imitation. So, you cuss once and your 2-year-old starts repeating it, even though you never asked them to, right? They're just imitating they soak up whatever you do. But as your kids get older, they continue to imitate, but they imitate their parents less and less, and they imitate their peers more and more. And so as a parent, one of the best levers that you have, you can't tell your kids what to do or who to imitate or who they could be friends with or whatever. You can try, but it often doesn't work very well. But what you do have control over is you have more say of what city you live in, what schools they go to, which extracurriculars they're involved in. And, I played baseball all the way through college. And I always think about, for a long time, I was a swimmer as well. And comparing those two sports is interesting. Like baseball is my first love, so I ended up sticking with that and everything. But man, every swimming team I was on, all those kids had good GPAs. they were all good students. And there are other sports that are similar, like cross country tends to be one where there are very high GPAs. But my point here is this, that if you get your kids involved in an extracurricular where all of their friends are good students, then there becomes this natural like status hierarchy where they're like, oh, well, to be part of this friend group, I need to be a good student too. Or all my other friends are getting A's, I want to get A's too. And they naturally start to soak that up, and it becomes more of their identity because getting good grades helps them belong, right? It helps them fit in with their other friends. And so that's a much longer term play. It's a much deeper way of looking at the issue. But ultimately, what you're looking to do is to instill this kind of identity where you take pride in that. And one of the ways to make habits incredibly attractive is if the habit allows you to belong. If doing the thing helps you fit in with your group. And, this is true for all humans, right? Like you as an adult, you may move into a new neighborhood and you walk outside on Wednesday night and you see all of your neighbors have their recycling bins out. And you're like, oh, we need to sign up for recycling. That's how we belong in the neighborhood, right? That's what people like us do. And your kids are the same way. When the habits that their friends have, they're going to soak up as well or want to perform because they're going to help them fit in with that group. And so I think from the parent standpoint, one of the most powerful levers you have for making good habits attractive is choosing the right tribes and groups for your student to be involved with.
That is brilliant. And we can extend that to the family culture too, right? So if we build this family culture of we finish work before we play, or, and we emulate that at home, and that kind of like, we don't look at our social media until we finished our work, or however we set that up, we set that culture, that kind of becomes the way to make it attractive, right?
I think that's certainly true. I've heard about good examples of like, one family pays their kids $20 to mow the lawn. Another family is instilling a culture of what it means to be part of this family is that we help each other out. And so then the teenager mows the lawn because that's how they contribute to the family culture. And the difficult part about fostering that is that it's not a one-time choice, right? It's not let me teach you this lesson once and then it will stick. It's just as hard on the parent to embody that and to stick to that over the long run. But if you're willing to do that, then yes, that's what you can do, and you can build a culture like that. I think it's also worth noting that any culture, whether it's a family, a team, a school, an organization, the true culture of any group are the shared habits of that group. If it's not a habit, it's not actually part of the culture. And it's the crucial part there is the shared habits. So the parents need to stick to that philosophy as much as the kids do. But if you do, then it becomes easier for people to do things for the right reasons, or because that's what it means to be part of this group, because it helps us belong, and not just because they get an external reward or you're forcing them to do it or so on.
Yeah, I think we have that part covered, because the parents who would attend a conference like this, our community here, are not the parents who are going to slack off and send the child and say, oh, go do it yourself. These are the parents who are really involved and who will do what it takes to build that family culture. That's why they're here. I love that you mentioned that. So let's go to the third law here, make it easy.
So, I like to recommend the 2-minute rule for making habits easy. You can also think of the 2-minute rule as an entry point rather than an end point. So when it comes to building your personal habits, I often think, hey, it's very useful just to do a 2-minute habit. Let's scale it down. Just meditate for 2 minutes, only do 5 push-ups, only read 1 page. Like, that's a great way to start. Of course, if you're working on homework, then in many cases, it's going to take much longer than 2 minutes to actually do the task. And so I think the way to consider this, the way to think about make it easy, is make the first action easy. Make the first 2 minutes as easy as possible. You're basically trying to build it's kind of like the entrance ramp to a highway, right? If you make the entrance ramp as easy and convenient and frictionless as possible, then they can get into the task. And once they're in the task, then it becomes easier to continue going. So I mentioned earlier, if you have like the markers and all the materials set out on the table, well, that's one way to make those first 2 minutes as convenient as possible. Another example that we already mentioned, removing distractions from the environment. right? Having the video game controller put away, having a clean space where they can work, having the music turned off. That's another way to make it as convenient as possible to do the right thing. But the core idea here is just trying to reduce all points of friction that are potentially going to pull you off course. And in many cases, it's kind of like, imagine that you start your day by making your bed, right? So making your bed is not a difficult action. It takes, a minute to get it done, but it's some positive movement in the right direction, right? And so after you make your bed, then you think, well, maybe I should brush my teeth. And then you brush your teeth and then you think, well, maybe I'll have a good breakfast. And then by the time you get done with that, you've taken 3 or 4 positive steps and you feel like your day is off to a good start. How can you do that same thing for homework? So what is the equivalent of making your bed for homework? Maybe it's starting with a very easy problem, right? And so let's get one under our belt and let's get a little bit of momentum going. Maybe it's starting with a very easy multiple choice question. It's only going to take you 10 seconds, but boom, it's answered and it's done. But something that gets you moving forward. And then once you're in the thick of the work, it's often so much easier to continue from there.
Let's keep going. All right, so the last law is make it satisfying. We've talked a little about this already in the context of make it attractive. So what else can we do here to make it more satisfying?
So let's talk about this from a big picture standpoint. So why do we want to make habits satisfying? Well, because we want to have some kind of positive emotional signal associated with the habit. When you get done doing it, you want to feel like, I feel good. That was enjoyable. That was satisfying. I enjoyed that. And if you do feel that way, if you feel successful at the end of it, then you have a reason to repeat it in the future, right? Imagine the alternative, right? Imagine you perform an action and you feel like you failed or you feel like it was unenjoyable. Well, nobody wants to repeat that again, right? So it's finding ways to feel successful. From an individual standpoint, this is about the feeling and the emotion associated with the task, right? So we've talked about having some of these external rewards, right? Like, layering on an external reward, like, each time you, I'll give you a couple examples. The one example that we talked through for exercise was taking a bubble bath afterward, because that would feel nice to finish that way. Okay, so let me give you 2 examples that you can use with your kids for homework. So the first one is, let's say you can use what's called a variable reward. Okay. So you get a jar and you fill it up with, say you put like 90 blue marbles in it and 10 red marbles. Okay. And then each day when they finish their homework successfully, they get to pull a marble out of the jar. If they pull out a blue marble, one of those 90, nothing happens. They did a good job. It's great. But every now and then they're going to pull a red one out. And when they do, they get some kind of prize or reward. Maybe it's an extra hour of TV time. Maybe it's $10. Maybe it's, I don't know, whatever is exciting to them, right? A chocolate bar, whatever. But the point there is that there's some kind of reward. There's some kind of expectation. It's like, oh man, I am anticipating if I get my homework done, maybe I'll get that prize, right? So that's one way to make it satisfying or make it rewarding. But the second thing, and I think ultimately this is it's not as big of a deal on any individual day, but I think it's more important over the long run, which is a phrase that I would use: praise the good, ignore the bad. So you don't always need to ignore the mistakes that your kids make, right? Like sometimes people need to be corrected and so on. But imagine that they sat down and they did their homework, right? And they get to the end of it. Let's praise the good, right? You don't want to criticize the very behavior that you were asking to see in the first place, right? Imagine, like the introverted kid comes down to the table for dinner and people are like, oh, look who showed up, right? And like, that's exactly what you were hoping they would do, was engage, but then now they feel punished for it. And so they don't feel successful when they did the thing that you asked them to do. And you don't want that same thing to happen when you are asking them to perform their homework or exercise or whatever it is, right? Like I saw someone at the gym the other day. They got in there, worked out on a Friday night, and then someone said, oh, it was kind of a short workout. And it's like, when instead they should be saying, wow, it's amazing that you were here on a Friday, right? So praise the good, ignore the bad. Even if it was short, who cares? That's not the point in the long run. And so finding ways to praise your student or child for doing the behavior that you're asking them to do, I think is probably the best lever that the parent has for making that habit feel satisfying.
Awesome. So one of the things I've heard about parents is to try making it playful. So things like, let's start the timer and let's see if I can finish the cooking before you finish the homework, right? So that's a game. And now the child is looking forward to doing I mean, there are ups and downs. The child might do a shoddy job, whatever. But as long as a habit is getting established, we can work on improving it later, right? That way we are getting our cooking done and they're getting their homework done. Everybody's happy.
One thing you notice with that strategy is that, so I mentioned earlier, there are these 4 stages to a habit: cue, craving, response, reward. The craving is about the anticipation that comes before the habit, right? You see the cookie and then you anticipate, oh, this is going to be tasty. I should go grab it and eat it. And coming up with games like that is a way to ramp up anticipation and motivation for the student, right? Like, okay, let's see who's going to finish first. Am I going to finish the meal or are you going to finish the homework? Mm-hmm. And now they're anticipating, oh man, I wonder if I could win, right? I wonder if what this would be like. And so games like that ramp up the craving and the motivation aspect of the habit and increase the odds that, you know, they're going to dive in and give it a better effort and so on.
That has been amazing, James. I think we are a little out of time. So do you want to go through another example, or do you think we've done a good job of kind of breaking this up?
I think that's a good balance and a good coverage of the main principles. Unfortunately, I do have to run, but it's been great to talk through some of the